Using graphs in the classroom to determine if interventions are effective. The purposes of using graphs are to organize data during the data collection process. Organizing data helps with interpretation and makes it easier. It also allows for ongoing evaluation of the intervention effectiveness and serves as a communication tool among professionals and parents about the student's progress. There are some basic elements of a line graph that are necessary to know in order to appropriately interpret data. First are the axes. They're the boundaries of the graph. The x-axis is the horizontal axis on a graph. It shows how many times the data were collected, for example, sessions, days, or weeks. The y-axis is the vertical axis on a graph. It shows the target behavior, for example, the number of correct behavior, percentage of time engaged. A data point is a small geometric shape, for example, a dot or a square, that represents the occurrence of the behavior. The data path is the solid line that is created to connect the data points. The condition or phase line is the vertical line that separates the data points between two conditions or phases, for example, baseline phase and intervention phase. The x-axis label is the defined name of the x-axis, for example, sessions, days, or weeks. The y-axis label is the defined name of the y-axis, for example, the number of problem behavior or the percentage of time on task. The condition phase label is the name of the condition, for example, baseline or intervention, and it typically appears at the top of each phase. Let's take a look at Jeff's graph. On Jeff's graphs, you will notice that there are the number of out-of-seat behaviors is the y-axis label, and the x-axis label is number of sessions. There are 1 to 10 sessions. There are two phases in this graph. The labels are baseline and intervention. There are multiple data points in baseline and intervention, and as you can note, there are lines drawn between each data point which indicates the data path. When transferring data to graphs, you need to determine the unit count of the observed behavior, and that's based on the behavior's dimension. This will be reflected on the y-axis and in the y-axis label. For example, the number of behavior, the number of time, the number of behavior per unit of time, or percent. You will separate the baseline and intervention data, or the data collected during the different conditions. This will determine where to discontinue the data paths and where to place the condition lines. You will identify the total number of times the data were collected, which will be reflected in the x-axis and its label, and organize the data so that they reflect one number per unit. So one number per day, one number per session, one number per week on the x-axis. And this will determine the value of each data point. Once you determine the appropriate labels for each condition, this will be reflected in the condition labels. Here are some criteria for evaluating your graphs. Ensure that all axes are labeled. Make sure that there are appropriate increments indicated on each axis. For example, 1, 2, 3, 2, 4, 6, 10, 20, 30. You will want to ensure that your data are plotted correctly. The value 0 is raised at the y-axis, and value 0 is crossed at the x-axis, but 0 is not labeled. There is no such thing as a 0 session or 0 day. Maximum values on the x-axis and y-axis scales reflect potential maximum values. The break in data path at a phase or condition line is important. You do not want to continue a data path across a condition line. Phase lines between baseline and intervention phase are important. And then phases or conditions should be labeled at the top of each graph, centered at each condition.